A place where you've pointed out a lot of gambling is in China. And you've been very complimentary of China's economy and the growth, but you have warned that their government is too corrupt and that gambling is a massive problem for the Chinese economy.
Well, the corruption is a much bigger problem than the gambling. But yes, I think China should learn by our example and step down pretty hard on their speculative excesses. And I think they may do it. They're pretty pragmatic. They've seen our mess. I feel more hopeful about the Chinese making the right decision than I do about my own government.
Well, and you've talked about how communism and capitalism in China work well together. So well that you probably wouldn't change it?
Well, it's not really communism as we traditionally think of communism. A communism that accepts sort of free market development is not classical communism. What they've said is we'll throw out the basic heart of communism and keep one-party rule. And what I'm saying is that it's working pretty well. Very well. I'm not such a purist that I just assume that the only correct way to do things is for everybody else under all circumstances the way that we do things. I think we were very lucky to have a big virgin country and be protected by big oceans, and we got a lot of luxury to do a lot of things our way and have it work pretty well. That doesn't mean it's exactly right for everybody else under other circumstances. And I'm terribly impressed with the way the modern Communist Party in China is including all these engineers as they rise.
Well, that
is a very desirable thing. I wish we had more engineers in Congress.
BYD.
Yeah.
Chinese company that Berkshire holds about 10% stake in, but you're the one, Mr. Munger, that should be credited with that.
Yes, but my good Chinese friend Li Lu is the one who found it for me, so.
Given BYD and where it stands now, how confident are you in this company? Can BYD take over the electric car market, not only in China, but in the U.S. and globally?
No.
No.
Of course it can't take over the whole electric car market of the world. That's not going to happen.
Can they lead it versus the American, GM versus Chrysler versus Ford in this country?
Well, I'm going to surprise you. I think the chances are pretty good that the biggest financial achievements of BYD have nothing at all to do with cars. I think a lot is going on in that company that is likely to help the world, and that there's talent and merit in that place that is awesome. And for a man as old as I am to have the fun of watching a place like this work so hard and so brilliantly on such important problems and with so much success, I feel like one of the luckiest men in the world. I could be an old man sitting on the country club porch, and instead I get to watch BYD do a lot of wonderful things that are going to help not only China but the whole world.
Any specifics that you can give us? I mean, we know that this was, they made cell phone batteries, and then they made really good batteries to run cars, but it's far beyond that.
Well, take a big lithium battery, which will time shift power in all of the utility systems of the world that need more and more time shifting of power as they draw more of their power from the sun and wind. This is not a slight advantage to humankind as it happens. And believe me, they will try and participate in that just as much as they possibly can, and to make every contribution that intelligence and will can enable them to make. And of course, that's fun for me to watch. I'd much rather do that than watch somebody trade derivatives. Think of how much more constructive and how much more fun it is to interface with the people at BYD instead of the people on the derivative desk. I understand how a commercial bank hates nurturing some little company along with loans, and when he finally needs a public security issue, they have to fob him off to an investment bank. They want to follow their customer. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that's not the main problem. We could allow commercial banks to underwrite securities for their customers. it's this vast trading in derivatives and proprietary trading that is now the problem. Canada doesn't get in trouble with. There are a lot of countries that have commercial banks that can underwrite securities that don't have troubles. We don't have to have exactly the same result we had under Glass-Steagall. What we need to rein in is the crazy leverage.
How's it going to be done? I mean, because
it would be child's play for somebody like me to sit down and write the legislation. But of course, I'm not. No, nobody's asking me.
We're asking you. You're talking about a regulatory system that you say utterly failed us, and now you've got a proposal on the Senate floor that could reach the president's desk in a matter of days or weeks. So this is the critical time.
So
do we have it wrong?
Well,
we're going after the wrong things.
Probably.
Yet
nobody's going after the accountants, and the accountants have utterly failed us. No, they'll do a lot wrong. They always have. But will they be better than nothing? I think they will be better than nothing. But whether they will actually do it right, if I'm correct in what should be done, I would bet a lot that they won't do it right. And I don't think it's that hard to do it right. You just take away the ability to run these vast derivative books and proprietary trading strategies. We do not need that level of risk in institutions that are too big to fail and that use the government's credit. It's crazy to give the government's credit, the government's fountain pen, to somebody and say you can do any damn thing you please. I don't think we want the contagion of this miasma of super leveraged, super greedy trading to be in the part of our system that ought to be more like engineering bridges. The system for engineering bridges is an ordinary person can't design to the standards and get in trouble. You don't need to be a genius at self-control or anything else to design a good bridge. And we have a system in our financial institutions where we allow them to create, well, it's the equivalent of allowing lots of hydrogen and oxygen in every intersection and then saying, go through here with a flamethrower. You know what's going to happen.
Well, isn't the question social utility? Isn't the question,
oh, yes,
what do these products provide?
Well, if you ask my opinion on that subject, the net social utility of practically all the modern derivative trading is negative. If you take every advantage they give the wider civilization, add them all up, weigh them against the disadvantages, we'd be better off without the whole caboodle.
So they should be illegal?
Of course.
Will they ever be?
Well, Tennyson once said the thoughts of men are widened with the process of the suns. So maybe in the long pull, this has been pretty diseased. If you look at the balance sheet of a major investment bank, you see trillions of notional value, uncleared positions in the hundreds of billions, partial collateralization, big complexity. It just looks like hydrogen and oxygen waiting for flame. And that's because it is hydrogen and oxygen waiting for flame. And of course a wise civilization shouldn't permit it. Why in the hell should J.P. Morgan Chase have the biggest derivative book in the world with all these uncleared transactions? And furthermore, the accounting is phony. It's not deliberately phony. The banks don't realize how phony their accounting is in their derivative books. That's partly the fault of the accountants, including the accountants in the regulating agencies. If American accounting were better, we would have had a lot less trouble.
Well, what's acceptable then? Should we go back to 10 to 1 as a limit?
Well, are you asking me what I would do if I had all the power?
Yes.
I would turn investment banking back into a very boring utility-like business, which it was when I was young. all they would be doing was helping people issue stocks and bonds, acting as an honest stockbroker, and market making with limited inventories, and having the commodity trading and the oil trading and the leverage derivatives, and that would all be gone. I would have them right back in a boring business, and I would limit the amount they could have. I wouldn't let them have these internal hedge funds, which in effect were using the government's credit to do any damn thing they pleased with no limit. And they have proven that they can't be trusted with such powers. And I think the correct thing to do is to take the powers away. They can divide in two. If they've got a bunch of people that are good at oil trading and speculative trading, and of course I would go back to controlling margin credit. Effective control of margin credit in this country disappeared when we allowed the derivatives. And it was this class and their lobbying that gave us all these new derivatives that prevented effective control of margin lending against securities. The first letter on that subject, when they brought in the option exchanges, the only letter I remember in opposition was signed by Warren Buffett. He said, "We don't need this." I think Warren was right then, and I think I'm right now. We do not need these people doing this vast skein of activities with this miasma of super profits and a lot of gross immorality in terms of the way they deal with the customers. The derivative traders have tended to rook their own customers. That's not a pretty sight. It's a dirty business.
It's a dirty business. I mean, this is a stance you've held for at least the past few years, if not longer, in 2007.
From the inception.
You talked about...
Nobody was the least bit interested in anything we have to say except now.
And in 2007, you warned about it, saying, this is going to cause a lot of trouble. It may be highly profitable now, but it'll cause a lot of trouble. You foresaw a lot of what happened on the derivatives front, but did anything surprise you in terms of just how bad, how catastrophic it became?
Yes, I think the gross size of it. Even someone as realistic about human nature as I am was surprised by the extent of the folly and evil.
You talk about new rules in the game a lot. And how will those new rules that we see after the government eases back a little bit, and we have many more congressional hearings and some new rules are adopted, others fall by the wayside. How do you foresee that affecting Berkshire? Or does it not? Well,
it indirectly affects the companies whose securities we own. The other interesting question of morality and decency is consumer lending. And I would argue that the major non-investment banks have by and large misbehaved in consumer lending. They have had a marketing model which is the equivalent of a liquor company that seeks out the people very susceptible to alcoholism and tries to suck them into alcoholism. That is not a pretty model. In fact, it's an ugly, indecent model. And I think that the president is exactly right when he says he's going to impose limits on what leading banks using the credit of the United States to exist can do in terms of abusing the lending to the fiscaholics. The fiscaholics deserve some protection from their own government. They can't help themselves.
You and Warren like Wells Fargo. You love Wells Fargo.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd own more of it if you could. Isn't Wells Fargo guilty of a lot of these actions on the mortgage front?
I think they were way better than almost anybody else of similar size.
But it's like being the best kid in detention, no?
Well, who is totally free from fault? If I ran Wells Fargo, there would be a few things that I would change. But if you average out Wells Fargo, it's behaved both wisely and with more morality than most others.
Why do you think that is? Norwest really took over Wells Fargo. It kept the Wells Fargo name. Does that have anything to do with the fact that it was a Midwestern bank? It had a different mentality?
To some extent, I think that's true. But Wells Fargo, when we bought into it for the first time, was not allied with Northwest. And it had a very good culture compared to other banks. So to some extent, they were marrying one good culture with another. There's a reason why we consider it a much better bank than most of the other big banks.
There the view by many around the world of Wall Street as all being scuzzy, and you and Warren have major investments in big banks, so you obviously don't think that.
No, they're not all scuzzy.
So who are the biggest perpetrators?
Well, what happens is that the people sort of lose control. If you have a proprietary trading and he suddenly makes $300 million, he wants more power and more. And so you give him more billions to play with, and then he makes more and you give him more. And in a sense, all these nice people are prisoners of the system, and nobody can say no to the ever-expanding number of activities, and they're all competitive, and they don't like it if J.P. Morgan is making a lot of money in trading derivatives and they're making a smaller amount, and so the envy and the internal acquisitions of power by the heavy trading proprietary people, it just naturally causes an expansion where very good people end up in a very silly outcome. I would argue that happened less at Goldman because they have more of a partnership culture and they're better at controlling people. And that's why I don't like Goldman being singled out, because I regard them as the best of the investment bankers, and everybody is now pillaring them as if they were the worst.
Why do you think they're being villainized?
I think it's an accident.
It's an accident?
It's an accident.
On the fact of, on the part of lawmakers?
Just their name came up. No, I think it's an accident.
An accident, not attacking the, quote unquote, smartest on the street.
Somebody in the SEC said, find something wrong with Goldman so I can step on them. No, I think something just popped out of the system of the myriad things they were investigating, and I think it's kind of an accident they ended up in the headlights. And I think it's an unfortunate accident because I think they're the best of the breed, not the worst.
When you look at Goldman, you've said they're highest in morality and competency on Wall Street, yet they are at
the big banks on Wall Street, yes. And
they're at the focus of the SEC's investigation. They're potentially could be entangled in a criminal investigation by the Department of Justice. You and Warren have a $5 billion stake in the company. What happens to Goldman?
Well, they drew a lot of headlines, and they got attacked at a time when everybody was furious at all investment banks. And of course, it's a significant disadvantage to Goldman to have drawn all this attention. And they're not perfect. It isn't as though Goldman, they deserve some share of the blame for recommending this irresponsible system, along with all the other banks to their government. They liked all this increased power. And they thought correctly, we can handle all this discretion. But you shouldn't urge on your government a system of control that's so loose that only you can handle it without disaster. You should have a system of government that a less skilled person can't get in trouble under.
Will Goldman make it through?
Oh, sure.
No doubt.
No doubt.
Looking at the system, and we cannot forget the lawmakers that created this system. 90 senators voting in favor of repealing Glass-Steagall. Many of those senators were the ones lambasting Goldman executives on Tuesday on the Hill.
Well, there's no question about the fact that our legislators went along with a whole lot of governmental policies that were foolish. So probably the worst example is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
And yet they've gotten the least attention.
Well, not only that, they had the exact system of regulation they're now talking about. A specialized government body that has nothing to do but watch them and keep them sound. That's what they had, and of course it failed utterly. See, I think you have to take away activity prerogatives from people who were using the government's credit, including the people who are too big to fail. That worked in Glass-Steagall. We had a long period without scandal after we took away the powers of the banks. It isn't like the country didn't have actively growing GDP during all that period of Glass-Steagall. That system worked fine.